Hello everybody, welcome to Catherine Sews. Thanks so much for joining me today. This is the third video in the series about how to make jeans. In the first video, I sewed the western pocket with the little coin pocket, and the second video was all about the fly front. Today, we'll make the whole back of the jeans, including the yoke, the back pocket, I'll play around with some fun top stitching techniques, and then we'll sew the side seams and the inseam, and basically get it to the point where you can try it on, check the fit, and make any adjustments that are necessary. The pattern that I've been using is McCall's 6610, which I think is a really great pattern. It's got a good fit, I like the instructions, and it's going well. So if you can find McCall's 6610, then great, but if not, you can use these same techniques on any jeans pattern. So if you want to sew along, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you know when that next and last video in the series comes out, because that's where we're going to be finishing the jeans, putting on the waistband, the belt loops, and some rivets. It's going to be fun, so let's get started on the back of these jeans. So the only two things you'll need for these steps, beyond what we've talked about in the first two videos, are a top stitch thread if you want to. You can use your regular thread and maybe just do a heavier stitch, like a triple stitch, or you can use a contrast top stitch thread. Now the one that I fell in love with is not actually a top stitching thread, but I'll show you how I'm able to use it anyway. This one is a decorative thread, pearl crown rayon, but I really love the way it looks with my jeans, so I'm going to show you a nice little trick of how you can use a decorative thread that's not even meant for top stitching. The other thing you'll need if you are going to do a fancier top stitch on the back of your pocket, and if your denim has some stretch, you're going to want a piece of tearaway or wash away stabilizer just so you can do that top stitch without it stretching and distorting. So then, other than those two things, we're ready to jump in to sew the back of these jeans. There's the front that I've already finished, and then we've got the back pattern piece, the pocket, and the yoke. So in this video we'll be attaching the yoke and top stitching it, and then making the whole back pocket. We'll attach the pocket, sew that center back seam, top stitch it, sew the inseam, top stitch that, and then sew the side seam. And then before we edge stitch it, we'll try it on and make sure it fits and make any adjustments. Before I separate out the back pieces from the pattern piece, I want to just mark those dots where the pocket is going to sit. So to do that, I'm just going to stab a pin right through that hole at my size and then peel it back right where the pin is in the fabric on both sides, both right sides. I'm just going to put a wax dot. For the pocket, I copied the pocket piece onto white paper, marked off the seam allowance, and then I just drew the top stitch design that I think I'll try. So when we get to that step, I'll show you how I'm going to transfer this line to my pocket pieces. It's very easy to tell my right side from my wrong side, but if on yours, if it's not that easy, then just make sure you're opening up and you have a mirror image here. You've got two opposites. And then the wider side of the yoke goes to the center, and then we'll just flip down right sides together. Now sometimes there's some ease or extra fabric on a seam like this, so I will put a few pins. I'll sew straight across at the 5/8 or 15 line. I do like to leave the pieces chained together. It's faster for me, it actually saves thread and time, but also helps keep me consistent in the stitching. And then serge. And of course, if you don't have a serger, you would just zigzag that. And then I'm pushing the seam allowance down toward the pant, away from the yoke. I'll edge stitch and then do a second line at the edge of my presser foot. I'm making sure to keep that seam right open. I could run and press that, but the edge stitch is going to do the same thing as long as I have it opened out fully. You could do this as a true flat felled seam, but that's for another video. And then just snip those apart. And there you go, that's pretty nice. Good, let's go into the pocket. I've been playing around with different top stitching. I bought this beautiful pearl crown rayon thread. It's really thick and shiny, and I just fell in love with, I've never fallen in love with thread before, but I love that thread. But the lady at the store said, don't try to top stitch with it because it'll shred in the needle. And she was absolutely right. Like within 4 stitches, it was all shredded. So it doesn't work as a top stitch. But what I did was wound it onto a bobbin instead. And then when you're top stitching this way, right, it's the bobbin thread that shows. And so I was playing around with different stitches like that. Because my fabric has a stretch to it, I'm going to have to stabilize it if I do want to just do a straight stitch with it. So I know that I have to stabilize this fabric a little bit, and if I don't stabilize the fabric, the stitches might look wiggly like this. And then this is like a temporary spray adhesive, just a light spray of that, just stick that down. Good enough. And then with my design, I'm going to just cut right on my line with paper scissors. Good. Then I can just take my friction pen, and in fact, because it's on the inside on top of stabilizer, you could really just use a pen or pencil and then flip for this side. Okay. Good. So if I have the fancy thread in the bobbin and I sew on top of here, then it'll look good on the outside. So, but I've got the fancy thread in the bobbin. Lots of little pivots when you're going around a tight curve like that. Oh my gosh, that's so pretty. That's so pretty. Okay, I'm gonna do a second line just on top there. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. I could cry, it's so pretty. I'm super happy with that. And now this stabilizer should just be able to be removed easily. So now I'm just going to iron that just to set the thread. Oh my gosh, I could faint. It's so pretty. Oh. Now the instructions say to turn a 1/2 inch and then a second 1/2 inch. What I prefer to do is turn the whole amount and then tuck in the edge. So I know that sounds like a subtle difference, but it just works better. I actually have this set to a smidge more than 1 inch because of what's called turn of cloth. Turning twice takes up some of the fabric. So set this to 1 inch and 1/8, almost 3 centimeters. So 1 inch and 1/8 on both, nice and consistent. And then just tuck in that edge. It actually just works a lot better than trying to turn twice. It comes out straighter. This is how I'll be doing the hem as well. So I left my fancy thread in the bobbin because I'll just sew right across here, and that'll give me that nice stitch across the top as well. I just ran back to the machine and did that stitch across the top edge. So now I'm turning under all of the remaining edges. Just turn that down and press. One thing I learned when I was making my shacket was to clip right here. So when you turn it up and then you turn the other side up, it gives you a much flatter corner. On these corners, really, it's like taking off that little bit. You definitely don't want a raw edge sticking out here. We also don't want it to start looking raw at the point. Don't cut too far in, 1 centimeter or so, less than 1/2 inch. But I do like that trick. It does make a nice difference on your corners, especially with denim that can get so thick. So take your time getting your pockets prepared. Definitely don't sew this before you get it onto the pant. It does not look good. And now we'll just put our pocket matching up the corners to those 2 dots. And then I'm switching back to the regular thread because I'll be sewing this with the good side up. So at least 5 pins, all with them pointing in, and then I'll sew nice and close to the edge, and then a second line at the edge of my presser foot. If your corners are getting too thick and you're worried about sewing that, just take your pin out, take a hammer, and just hammer those corners a few times. It kind of crushes the fibers. Now, this isn't feeling too thick. I think my machine will be fine here, but that was the tip at the end of part 2. And I really do think that's helpful. Nice clean pivots are really important here. Good. I'm going to turn and a few stitches across. Maybe one more of one more stitch until when I pivot, the edge of my presser foot is along that first line of stitching, and then I'll come back the other way. And again, be careful where you pivot. You want to stay in line. And then a little bit across the top here. Okay, I am super happy with that. These little corners that are threatening to stick out, I'm going to cut that off. And that is pretty spectacular, I have to say. So I'm madly in love with those back pockets. So now I'm going to flip the two backs right sides together. And I want to make sure that this seam lines up. So I'll stick a pin right there and maybe one after as well. So I'll sew this at the 15 line or 5/8 line. Sew, serge, press to one side, and then double top stitch. On that center back seam, you want to push your seam allowance the same way you did to the front. We pushed it to our right when we're top stitching on the front, and so we'll do the same on the back. And then that's a bump there that you might want to hammer as well if your denim is thick. I'm just going to take it slowly. And then a second line at the edge of my presser foot. Okay, that looks good. Oh, except does one pocket look much higher than the other? Darn it. Is anyone gonna notice that? I'm gonna notice that. You're gonna notice that. Shoot. Does that mean I have to take off this pocket? Oh. Okay, so that was frustrating, right? Sometimes those moments happen when you're wondering, like, is anybody gonna notice my mistake? If I'm squinting and running for a bus, am I gonna be able to notice that? But I always think it's better to fix it. If it's gonna bother you, if it's taking away from your pride in the project, it's better to fix it. So I had one episode in front of Netflix of unpicking and repinning, and now I'm happy again. So the pockets look great, they're lined up. I can now be proud of my project. And really that's the whole point of what we're doing here, right? Is making something that we can feel proud of. So it's always best to go ahead and fix those mistakes. And you know what? The fixing process is never as bad as you think it's gonna be. So it's worth doing. Oh, and I wanna show you a trick to make sure that that doesn't happen to you. To make sure pockets are aligned, once I get one pocket pinned, I put the two pieces back to back, line them up nicely, and then just feel through the fabric. And you can feel when you've got them nicely lined up. And it works great. I don't know why I didn't do it this time. I didn't do it and paid the price. We're back on track. We're ready to sew the front to the back now. So we'll be taking this whole back, put it right sides together with the whole front, and sewing the whole inseam. And finish the edges, push the seam allowance toward the back, and then double top stitch that. Now usually I don't do a top stitch until I know I'm happy with the fit, but I have done my muslin, I know I'm happy with the fit, and if there is any adjustment that I'm going to do later, I'll be doing it from the side seam, which doesn't get a heavy top stitch. So we're fine to go ahead and top stitch that inseam. And then we'll sew the side seam and then try them on. Good, so I've got the whole inseam pinned together. So now when we match up that seam, because we push the seam allowance to our right both times, front and back, so now this seam and this seam are not overlapping each other. They are just meeting in the middle. So that reduces the bulk a little bit. Match up your notch here and match up the bottom corner, pin in between, and then sew your inseam. And then you'll finish your edges either with a zigzag or serging, or if you're really ambitious, you'll do a flat felled seam there. I'm gonna serge. I'm pushing the seam allowance toward the back, and then I'm gonna open the seam out flat and edge stitch, and then do a second line. Now I just turn and come back the other way. Good, so the inseam is all double top stitched like that. Looking pretty good. And now I'll just bring the front and back right sides together at the side seam and sew that. I'll sew both like that, but before I finish my seams, I'll try them on and see how they fit. Once you try them on, if they feel just a little bit too roomy, put them on inside out and then pinch away whatever you don't want. It's good if you have a friend help you. Put your pins vertically so they mimic sewing and just take away whatever fabric you don't want. Good, and then just sew from pin to pin and try them on one more time before you cut off the excess. So I ended up taking mine in quite a bit, I guess because this denim has a lot more stretch than the unbleached cotton that I used for my muslin, which has 0 stretch. And now I'm pressing toward the back. And now of course you can't double top stitch your side seam in the same way you did your inseam because you're working in a tube now, and so you just can't get in there to double top stitch. Second to last set of instructions for this is just pushing your seam allowance toward the back and then edge stitching just to the bottom of the pocket. And you know what? I think I'm going to switch back to that fancy thread and do that in that thread. And then it's just an ease stitch around the top of the waistband. I don't know if you really need to do that or not, but there's no downside to doing it. So let's do it. It's just a long stitch length going around the top. I'm just switching the order here. I'm going to do my ease stitch while I've got the regular bobbin thread in. And no backpacks, and don't cut your thread short. Keep your seam allowance going the way you pressed it. You don't go into the zipper area with your ease stitch. Yes, normally you would have this right side up to do your edge stitch, but because I'm with that fancy thread showing, I'll be doing it upside down. So I'm also changing my stitch length to 3.5 millimeters long. That heavier thread, I think it looks better with a longer stitch. And what makes more sense to me is to just do to the bottom edge of this pocket. Then I'll know I'll have both sides exactly the same. I'm not kind of guesstimating. So that's the side seam. That looks good. Okay, well, perseverance is paying off, and look at how pretty these look at the back. I just love that. I'm really happy that I did fix that pocket, because it would have bugged me for sure. So just one more video to go where we'll be putting on the waistband, the belt loops, the rivets, the button, and doing the final hem. So we're getting there. It's almost done. So I hope you're making some too. Let me know in the comments below if you are and how it's going, or if you have any questions. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you know as soon as I upload the next and last video of the series. Until then, you take care.